When Adolf Hitler and his bride of less than 40 hours, Eva Braun, ended their lives in his bunker study at about 3:30 p.m. on the 30th of April, 1945, according to witnesses, not one but three firearms were involved. Throughout World War II, Hitler had been routinely armed, having a special holster sewn into his right trouser pocket where he kept a mouse gun, as they are known to collectors, a small caliber pistol as a weapon of last resort. According to his SS valet Heinz Linge, Hitler concealed carried a Walther Model 8, an 8-round 6.35 millimeter or 25 ACP weapon. However, several days before his death, Hitler had opened a safe in his bedroom and taken out a Walther PPK chambered in 7.65 millimeter or 32 ACP. He carried this in his uniform jacket pocket, presumably in some fear that with the Soviets closing on the bunker, he might have needed to take action, to end his own life quickly to avoid capture. What happened to the three Walther pistols that were on the coffee table in front of the sofa in the bunker when Hitler and his wife died is a bit of a mystery. I'm Frank Dawson. This is an investigation of Hitler's death pistols and their mysterious disappearance. Before we dive into this story, please give this video a like. It really helps push the video to more viewers and supports the channel. For the final act in his study on the 30th of April, 1945, Hitler also asked his valet to bring him his Walther PP, a larger frame pistol that he used to wear in a holster during earlier visits to the front in 1939 to 41. The PP was chambered in 7.65 millimeters. Hitler used either the Walther PP or the PPK to allegedly shoot himself. The most likely weapon, according to witnesses, was the PP. The third weapon in the room had been given to Eva Hitler. We know that Eva Braun, as she then was, had been gifted an Ortgies pistol, a hammerless semi-automatic. Braun's inscribed Ortgies was the small frame version, chambered in 6.35 millimeters. However, Braun had left her Ortgies in her Munich house, and it was subsequently taken as a souvenir by an American officer. In the Berlin bunker, Frau Hitler was given another Walther PPK for use to shoot herself with, though in the event it wasn't used and Eva allegedly took poison. I say allegedly took poison, and Hitler allegedly shot himself because there has been extensive investigation into the deaths of Hitler and Eva Braun, which revealed a lot of questions about the forensic evidence, and also the conclusion that forensic fraud was committed by the Germans. It is, of course, right to point out that Hitler may not have been able to shoot himself. He was physically degenerated, and as shown in footage from March the 11th, 1945, he was suffering from some kind of shaking palsy, which many historians have labeled as Parkinson's disease. The Soviet investigations believed that Hitler's valet, Heinz Linge, may have actually shot Hitler, whether ordered by the ailing Führer to do so or on the orders of Martin Bormann, in order to clear the way for the breakout from the bunker before the Soviets actually arrived at the front door. I think my research will convince you that forensic fraud was indeed committed by Hitler's entourage in the 31-hour window between the Führer's death and the arrival of the first Red Army troops at the bunker. Anyway, everyone agrees that the Walther PP was Hitler's and that it was an important relic of the deceased Führer, along with his personal PPK, both being in Hitler's study at the time of his death. Members of Hitler's staff waited anxiously outside the door to Hitler's study, whilst the boss, as they called him, conducted his final act. By this stage, Red Army troops were only half a kilometer from the Reich Chancellery and the bunker beneath it. According to the testimony of multiple witnesses, and remembering that this testimony may be a lie, at 3:40 p.m., as per Hitler's instructions, Linge opened the study door and entered the small room. The first thing he noticed was the strong odor of bitter almonds, a signature of cyanide poisoning. Close behind Linge was Martin Bormann, Hitler's powerful and feared private secretary and now Nazi Party minister. According to the traditional story, Hitler and Eva were both dead. She was seated on the right of the sofa with her legs drawn up under her. A vase of flowers had been kicked off the table in front of the couple. Hitler was bent forwards and had, according again to many witnesses, a visible gunshot entry wound to his right temple. Both of Hitler's pistols lay on the carpet at his feet, while Eva's PPK was still on the coffee table. No mention was ever made by any of the recorded witnesses of a spent cartridge casing found in the room, which I do take as rather odd. However, this again is outside the focus of this particular video, so focusing only on what happened to the three pistols, Hitler's SS adjutant, Major Otto Günsche, now entered the room. He surveyed the scene, then picked up the three pistols. He then went outside to the corridor and announced the deaths to the assembled staff. According to various testimonies, the pistols were next deposited on the desk of SS General Hans Rattenhuber, head of Hitler's personal bodyguard unit, the Reichssicherheitsdienst, the RSD. Then Hitler Youth leader Artur Axmann entered the room with his adjutant, Gunther Weltzin. It seems that Axmann picked up the Walther PP, which had been identified to him as the pistol used by Hitler, and pocketed it. He said to the assembled people in the room that he would hide it, quote, for better times, end quote. It has been claimed that he also handed Hitler's PPK to his adjutant, Weltzin. It seems from other testimony that Eva's PPK had of course been removed from the room and deposited on Rattenhuber's office desk. For it was claimed that Axmann also took this pistol, and later the following day, 1st of May, 1945, handed it to German Girls' League, or BDM Berlin leader, Gerda Hartmann. Hartmann was second in command to Otto Hartmann, who commanded the Hitler Youth Regiment Berlin that was still fighting hard. Gerda Hartmann took care of all relief and support for this regiment of teenagers and older boys. Hartmann and another BDM leader both visited Axmann's headquarters regularly to make situation reports during the Battle of Berlin, and both had been badly injured by a Soviet shell when leaving Axmann's Wilhelmstrasse command post. Axmann visited them in the overcrowded Reich Chancellery Emergency Hospital near the Führerbunker. Hartmann's leg had been shattered, and she had 13 shrapnel wounds. This was on the afternoon of the 1st of May, a few hours before the breakouts from the Reich Chancellery would commence. Axmann handed Eva Hitler's Walther PPK to Hartmann, in case she wished to shoot herself when the Soviets arrived. Hartmann tucked the loaded pistol under her pillow. Hartmann died shortly after of gas gangrene. But what she did with the PPK before her death is not known. The pistol may have been taken by Soviet troops who overran the hospital, or it could have been passed to another BDM member before Hartmann succumbed to her wounds. Returning to Hitler's pistols, Dr. David Irving conducted a search into the present location of a quantity of Hitler's ashes allegedly removed from the funeral pyre of Hitler by Axmann and carried out of Berlin in a small tin. The closeness of Axmann to Hitler in the final weeks of the war was very noticeable. Axmann had expressly moved his headquarters from Kaiserdamm 86 in the west of Berlin to Wilhelmstrasse, 64 diagonally opposite the Führerbunker, in the early stages of the battle for the city. Axmann's Hitler Youth represented the future of the Nazi cause, post-Hitler, and Axmann was at the time involved in a plan to use hundreds of adult Hitler Youth leaders across Germany to form a post-war resistance organization. Axmann was the youngest of Hitler's senior men, and Hitler held him in increasingly high regard in the final weeks, as his Hitler Youth teenagers proved some of the toughest opponents to the Soviet advance. Axmann had received 2 awards from Hitler shortly before the end, the Iron Cross First Class quote for his personal gallant efforts, end quote, thousands of Hitler Youths having been thrown into the fighting, and the rarest decoration of all the Gold Cross of the German Order. Axmann being one of only 11 individuals so honored and one of only 2 that survived the war. It was a mark of the esteem in which Hitler held the Hitler Youth leader. A few days before the end, Hitler had a long private meeting with Axmann, during which he intimated that Nazi ideology would survive his demise, alluding to the next generation of young Nazis that Axmann commanded. Remember, Axmann had already been by this time for months creating an underground Nazi organization to survive the German surrender. Axmann represented the future of Nazism, the living link between Hitler and the new generation. For his part, Axmann recognized the pistol that Hitler had used to end his life to be a holy relic of the regime, and along with a portion of Hitler's ashes to be preserved as the sacred relics of the new Hitler youth-run underground army he had been busily creating. On the 1st of May 1945, Axmann and Welsen both took part in the breakout from the Reich Chancellery. Axmann was unusual in that he managed to make it all the way to the American sector, but was eventually apprehended several months after the war, still organizing his underground army. When he was questioned as to what had happened to Hitler's Walther PP, Axmann said that he had buried it during his exfiltration from Berlin beside the Sandkrug Bridge. I personally doubt this story. The sources I referred to in my video on Hitler's ashes strongly suggest that Axmann definitely made it to safety with the tin containing some of Hitler's ashes, which he later buried in a grave associated with the early Nazi movement. Otto Günsche, who survived 10 years of Soviet brutality and later lived in West Germany, certainly thought that Axmann would never have thrown away the pistol. It was too important to him. In March 1967, David Irving had interviewed Günsche at length at his home and brought up the pistol question. Günsche told Irving that Axmann still had the pistol. Quote, Axmann had retained the gun as a memento. There is some reason to believe that his family still has it. It would be worth many millions on the American auction market. End quote. Axmann had been officially denazified in 1949 and was never found guilty of any war crimes. He became a businessman and between 1971 and 1976 lived on the Spanish island of Gran Canaria. From 1976 onwards, he lived in West Berlin, dying there in October 1996 at the age of 83. His cause of death was never announced, nor any details of his surviving family. The fact that he went to his grave, an unrepentant Nazi, makes his claim to have buried the relic pistol highly suspicious, and his official denials concerning carrying out of Berlin a quantity of Hitler's ashes even more so. For Hans Bauer, Hitler's personal pilot, who was in the bunker to the end, confirmed privately that Axmann had indeed taken the ashes and later buried them. Axmann had told Bauer this long after the war. Even more contentious were photographs given to me of two of Hitler's secretaries tending a grave where Bauer said Axmann had hidden the ashes, the grave of an early Nazi that neither secretary had ever known in life. So what were they doing tending his grave? Post-war, the surviving members of Hitler's inner circle kept in touch and often held reunions. Axmann, however, was unique among them in keeping his distance, only maintaining a friendship with Hans Bauer. Bauer, in turn, was close to all of the others. David Irving was one of very few outsiders who managed to gain the trust of this surviving inner circle of senior Nazis in the 1960s and 70s. And of course, they're all long since dead now. But I would take Günsche's admission concerning Axmann still having possession of the pistol to the bank. These people knew things about each other, things that are still kept private today. As to what became of Hitler's PPK that Axmann had given to his adjutant, we don't know for sure what happened to that. Welsen left the Reich Chancellery area with Axmann on the night of the 1st to 2nd of May, 1945. But during the exfiltration, Welsen was captured by Soviet troops and later died in Moscow. Presumably, the PPK was taken from him by the Soviets. If it wasn't hidden as a souvenir by some ordinary Soviet soldier, but was handed over to the NKVD when he was identified as part of the Reich Chancellery group, a group that Stalin and his minions were extremely interested in. There is a good chance that this pistol is still in Russia, among the relics relating to Hitler and the bunker personnel held at the Russian State Archive in Moscow, or Welsen threw it away before capture, and it was simply lost. There is a story of a PPK kept by Stalin in his Kremlin office post-war that was believed by the dictator to be the weapon Hitler had used to kill himself with. though it should be pointed out that Stalin did not believe that the burned body found in the Reich Chancellery Garden by Soviet troops was Hitler's, despite the NKVD's twisting the forensic evidence to fit this contention. And Stalin believed that Hitler had escaped. So, where does all this leave us? Well, to my mind, the only pistol of the three with a slim chance of resurfacing would be Hitler's Walther PP that Axmann kept allegedly, and certainly according to Otto Günsche, was still in his possession in the late 1960s. One thing is certain, Hitler's Walther PP has never surfaced since 1945. I think three scenarios are likely. The first is that Axmann did bury it near the Sandkrug Bridge in May 1945. If he wanted to get rid of it in a hurry, my question would be, why didn't he simply toss it into the river? Burying it suggests that he planned to come back for it. Possibly he did just that. For in the weeks after the war, when he remained free, he did return to Berlin on a couple of occasions, supposedly on secret business with this stay-behind organization he was working with. But he could just as easily have retrieved the pistol from its hiding place in the ruined city. The second possibility is that he successfully carried the pistol out of Berlin in May 1945 and lodged it with his family, or put it in a safety deposit box or whatever, and perhaps his descendants still have it. Scenario 3 is that Axmann sold or gave the pistol to someone else at some point before his death in 1996, which is probably very likely as well. My guess would be that Axmann either passed it on to his family or it was given or sold to someone else, likely a collector of very high-end Nazi relics, sometime before his death, and that it's in a very private collection somewhere. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share. You can also help to support my channel. Details in the description box below.